Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about session 5, and session 5 is a bit of an abbreviated session, but it has what we usually call the balancing exercises. So we're going to read what Ra has to say and try to talk a little bit about the balancing exercises and how to utilize those. So let's get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. I communicate now. Questioner. The last time we communicated, we were speaking of learning of healing. It is my impression that from what you gave to us in the earlier session, that it is necessary to first purify the self by certain disciplines and exercises. Then, in order to heal a patient, it is necessary, by example, and possibly certain exercises, to create a mental configuration in the patient that allows him to heal himself. Am I correct? I am Ra. Although your learn understanding distortion is essentially correct, your choice of vibratory sound complex is not entirely accurate as this language allows. It is not by example that the healer does the working. The working exists in and of itself. The healer is only the catalyst, much as this instrument has the catalysis necessary to provide the channel for our words, yet by example or exercise of any kind can take no thought for this working. The healing working is congruent in that it is a form of channeling some distortion of the intelligent infinity. So here's Ra just kind of clarifying Dawn's language, obviously, about the healer setting an example, doing certain exercises, creating a mental configuration in the patient. And really what you are is you're just opening a channel so that the working can happen regardless of your own will other than your will to open the channel. So it's a little more simple, I suppose, in that regard, as you just kind of have to step aside or again, as we talk about these healing exercises, we're undistorting the energy body so that the light of the creator can flow through us in a less distorted form, in the least distorted form that we can possibly manage with our energy body that we have in its configurations, because nobody has a perfectly undistorted energy body. We all have lessons that we're still trying to learn and have accumulated in our incarnations, and we have blockages that allow us to continue to interact in our daily lives, and everyone has their own personal configuration, and you only have to be so undistorted to be able to channel the one infinite creator to do this kind of quote-unquote working. So Dawn asks, we have decided to accept, if offered, the honor duty of learning teaching the healing process. I would ask as to the first step which we should accomplish in becoming effective healers. I am Ra. We shall begin with the first of the 3 teachings learnings. We begin with the mental learn teachings necessary for contact with intelligent infinity. The prerequisite of mental work is the ability to retain silence of self at a steady state when required by the self. The mind must be opened like a door. The key is silence. So I'm going to go ahead and break it apart as we read through it here. This first component of how to learn how to heal is meditation, silencing the mind. And that's a prerequisite of mental work, is being able to retain silence of the self at a steady state. So meditation is incredibly important. I've stressed that before. And here Ra is saying that it's even a prerequisite to being able to do any sort of future work. Healing is just one specific type of, again, we're using the term work, that one can do spiritually with their own energy body by being a channel. But to do any of that, you really need to meditate. Dawn and Carla's channeling group was first and foremost a meditation group. And so Dawn and Carla have been meditating at this point together for 16 years, 17 years, a very long time, and teaching others to meditate. And then as an offshoot of that came the channeling. Once people were able to slow and silence their own mind, then they could make room for messages from beyond, let's say. But the whole point of silencing the mind is to get to a baseline where you can recognize as thoughts are coming into your mind complex. Because all day long, we have thoughts running through our mind. They could be thoughts that, most of the time, they're thoughts that aren't even ours. And that's how I see meditation, is really learning how to sort our thoughts so that we can sort of see the ones that are useful and the ones that are holding us down, holding our consciousness back. And we have so many thoughts that hold our consciousness back that have been taught to us by TV, parents, teachers, friends, everyone around us. There's so many third density thought forms that we don't really need to engage with. You don't have to give energy to every thought that comes across your mind. You can have a thought cross your mind and say, oh, I don't really want to attach to that thought. I'm going to let it pass. And that's really what you're practicing in meditation. You're practicing finding that silence. And when thoughts come through your mind, you try to just kind of move them out of the way. You don't let yourself get carried away with the thought and the emotion behind that thought. So meditation is really this process of learning essentially to arrest the thoughts that come into our mind, so that when harmful thoughts of separation or just anything that might bring us down or lead us to a lower vibrational state, we can begin to recognize those thoughts before we get carried away with that thought. So meditation is very important because it allows us then to audit what's going on in our mind and not just let the thoughts that we've thought our whole life, which can become very, very ingrained in our thoughts, just typical things like you're not good enough, you have to work harder, you have to try harder, like these kinds of things are really limiting. And so once we can learn to understand which thoughts are limiting, and then we can learn to understand how to stop those thoughts from taking over our consciousness, that's when we start to get a mind complex that is more usable and can do things like heal others, because we aren't limited by the negative thoughts and letting those distract us. So, the mind must be opened like a door. The key is silence. Meditation is very, very important. If you struggle with meditation, I completely understand. As someone who is very likely ADHD, I'm often doing battle with my own thoughts when I sit down to meditate, but it just takes practice. It gets easier. It may never be perfect. It's not, you shouldn't have the expectation that sitting down in meditation means you have an empty mind. Sitting down in meditation is practicing recognizing our thoughts, recognizing when we're having thoughts, and trying to slow those thoughts that are just automatically coming into our mind down. So really it's just practice, practice, practice. And I think one of the most important things to do is to try to do it every day, even if it's just for a few minutes every day. If you have that kind of dedication and discipline and devotion to the process, then that in itself becomes a snowball that grows bigger and bigger and has more of an effect on your life. Because even if you aren't manifesting the perfect meditation every time you sit down and try to silence your mind, metaphysically it's the intention that matters even more than what actually happens. And again, the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. And I try to think of it as like the analogy of running a marathon. If you aren't a runner and you decide that I'm going to start training for a marathon, the first time you get up and run, you're going to be gassed within like a few minutes, right? You're going to be totally out of breath, going to feel exhausted. It's going to feel hopeless. It's going to feel painful. And you might want to change your mind about your initial goal of being able to run a marathon. But if you practice every day, it gets easier and easier and easier. And finally, you can get somewhere where you have a sense of accomplishment just from the dedication and the practice and the acquisition of that skill. So, after you learn how to find the key of silence, Raw says, within the door lies an hierarchical construction you may liken unto geography and in some ways geometry, for the hierarchy is quite regular, bearing inner relationships. So Raw's talking about the different layers of the mind here, the hierarchy of the mind, the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, the racial mind, the planetary mind, the cosmic mind. There's a hierarchy of the mind complex. And again, most of the time we're spending in our incarnations is in the conscious mind, the very surface part of the mind. And so as we meditate, we can learn to go deeper and deeper into the hierarchy of the mind complex and reach deeper parts of, eventually we get to the cosmic, the all mind. And so when you're in meditation, you can eventually get that deep. Maybe only briefly, maybe only sometimes, but it's there to reach for. So Ross says, to begin to master the concept of mental discipline, it is necessary to examine the self. The polarity of your dimension must be internalized. Where you find patience within your mind, you must consciously find the corresponding impatience and vice versa. Each thought that a being has in its turn an antithesis. The disciplines of the mind involve, first of all, identifying both those things of which you approve and those things of which you disapprove within yourself, and then balancing each and every positive and negative charge with its equal. The mind contains all things. Therefore, you must discover this completeness within yourself. So this exercise is about recognizing the emotions you have, and Ross says, specifically the ones you accept as part of your own identity and the ones you reject as not part of your identity, and recognizing that your identity is actually everything. You are everything. So favoring one polarized emotion and rejecting its antithesis is creating imbalance. And that's not saying that, you should try to be impatient as often as you're patient, right? It's not saying that you should be half the time patient and half the time impatient. That's not really what balanced means. Balance means just accepting both of these as a potential of your mind complex, because impatience isn't always bad. Sometimes we need to be impatient. Like if there's a crisis and nobody's paying attention and you need help, like it's good to be urgent and impatient in that situation so that whatever needs to be helped and resolved can get that attention that it needs. So, and again, the same thing with like anger. Anger is an emotion that we often judge. And of course, there are times when anger bubbles up and we would prefer not to be angry. I think that's the whole point, is most of the time we would prefer not to be angry. Anger doesn't usually feel good. We don't really feel constructive with anger. And Rod does say later on that anger is entropic, that it's a randomized energy. It's not as focused as a more refined emotional response. However, again, anger has its place. There are times when anger is more than justified and is really the only proper response to a situation, right? Other than the ultimate completely seeing love in every moment, which is what a totally balanced entity does. But if you're living a human life, there are going to be things that happen that cause anger. And that's fine. A lot of anger is very, very justified. And then going back to patience, like it's possible to be too patient. Like when you're too patient, you can become complacent and you can then enable people to, say, take advantage of you. And being in that kind of passive configuration of self all the time can lead to a lot of internalized distortions of unworthiness and just allowing yourself to be used by other people. If you can't speak up for yourself because you're just willing to let people be who they are, regardless of how it affects you, that isn't necessarily the highest expression of the self. We're going to get into like martyrdom territory where you allow people to use you. So all of these emotions have a purpose on the positive and negative side of the spectrum. So I think that's something that's really important to realize and internalize. The point of these exercises is to essentially do like exposure therapy with emotions so that we don't reject emotions that start to bubble up within us before we can actually feel them and process them through our energy body. Because if we start feeling anger and then we say, oh, no, and we shove that away, we just put it in a little box and we don't look at it. And then, again, when there is a situation when anger is the appropriate response, we may not have a very balanced response overall. We may not be able to balance it because we aren't feeling the anger that wants to be felt for that response. So the balancing exercises are about sitting in a safe place, feeling these emotions that we feel are quote-unquote good, and then its antithesis, which we feel is quote-unquote bad, and recognizing that all of these emotional states are temporary. They can flow through us, they can have a purpose, And we won't get stuck there. We won't get stuck just seething in anger. We won't get stuck just seething in impatience. And that's really what I think is a lot of the purpose of these balancing exercises. Because when you're trying to be an instrument, when you're trying to surrender to being an instrument of the Creator, you need to have all of your notes, all of your emotional notes available for the Creator to play. And so there are times when, if you are surrendered to the Creator and trying to do the Creator's will, there might be times when the Creator wants you to feel angry so that you can move a situation along, so that you can process this emotion in a genuine way, so that you don't reject a part of yourself, because anger is a part of all of us. And again, emotions come from the animal portions of our brain. They are truly a part of us and a part of who we are. And you have to accept these things before you can move past them. Like, yes, the more you get balanced, the less you're going to feel anger. But you can't get balanced if you reject the anger when you do feel it. And again, even a balanced entity, not a perfectly balanced entity. Ross is a perfectly balanced entity, responds to all situations with love. But you may, after a long period of time, get a lot of your emotional responses more mellowed out. You might feel a lot less at the whims of your animal emotional body. But it's likely that there are still times that you're going to feel anger about certain things. And the more balanced you are, the more likely you are then to let that anger flow through you, to feel that anger. That doesn't mean you have to act on that anger and do something that hurts somebody else. Like an internal emotion is just that. It's what's happening to you. And if you reject that, then you're rejecting a portion of the Creator. You're rejecting a portion of yourself. And you are everything. So you have to really learn to accept every single part of yourself and of the entirety of creation. But the emotional spectrum is something that essentially is contained within all of us. And so it's a good place to start as far as accepting all that there is. Because we all have emotions all day, every day. And we all decide what we're going to do with those emotions. And so there's a lot of catalyst there. And very specifically, taking the two emotions and balancing them out in this way allows you to flow along the spectrum of that polarized feeling. And again, if you want to be an instrument, then being able to slide along the scale is much more beneficial than having portions of the scale closed off. So Ross says, the second mental discipline is acceptance of the completeness within your consciousness. It is not for being of polarity in the physical consciousness to pick and choose among attributes, thus building the roles that cause blockages and confusions in the already distorted mind complex. Each acceptance smooths part of the many distortions that the faculty you call judgment engenders. So really, I was kind of already talking about that, accepting the whole emotional spectrum within yourself. The first discipline is to just feel those emotions, to allow yourself to feel those emotions. And then the second step is to accept those emotions as part of yourself. And to, again, not say, this emotion is me. I'm a patient, loving, kind person who doesn't feel anger, who doesn't feel impatience. Like, doing that just builds more distortions upon what is already distorted. Acceptance is what alleviates the distortions and allows them to fall away so that they aren't controlling us. So Ross says, the third discipline of the mind is a repetition of the first, but with the gaze outwards towards the fellow entities that it meets. In each entity there exists completeness. Thus, the ability to understand each balance is necessary. When you view patience, you are responsible for mirroring in your mental understanding patience/impatience. When you view impatience, it is necessary for your mental configuration of understanding to be impatience/patience. We use this as a simple example. Most configurations of mind have many facets, and understanding of either self-polarities or what you would call other self-polarities can and must be understood as subtle work. So really then, after you learn to recognize and feel and accept all of the emotions within yourself, the next step is to recognize and feel and accept the emotions you recognize in other people, and learn to do that kind of mirroring when you are triggered by other people's emotions. The first steps are when you're triggered by your own emotions. And then this third step is basically the same thing, but when you're feeling the other emotions from somebody outside of yourself. So if you see somebody in the store who's behaving in an impatient way, then you would mirror patience in your mind. If you see somebody who's behaving patient, you could mirror impatience in your mind. And this again just allows that free flowing of emotions and understanding those emotions and accepting those emotions as all valid. And then the fourth step, Ross says the next step is the acceptance of the other self polarities, which mirrors the second step. So once you are able to mirror those emotions that you see other people feeling within yourself, then you learn to accept those emotions that other people are feeling within yourself. And Ross says these are the first 4 steps of learning mental discipline. The 5th step involves observing the geographical and geometrical relationships and ratios of the mind, the other mind, the mass mind, and the infinite mind. So this is a little bit vague, but it's essentially kind of what I was talking about before. There are different layers to the mind, and learning those layers, learning how the mind expands and contracts and separates itself and tries to reunify with itself, and trying to, Ross says, observing those relationships and how the different layers of the mind interact with each other and feedback with each other in the polarity of self and other self, which isn't as emotionally exhausting as the first 4 steps. It's more of a passive thing, but I think you have to go through the process of accepting the emotions within yourself and within other people before you can honestly begin to observe these geographical and geometric relationships between the different parts of the all mind. So, Ross says, the second area of learned teaching is the study/understanding of the body complexes. It is necessary to know your body well. This is a matter of using the mind to examine how the feelings, the biases, what you would call the emotions, affect various portions of the body complex. It shall be necessary to both understand the bodily polarities and to accept them, repeating in a chemical/physical manifestation the work you have done upon the mind, bethinking the consciousness. The body is a creature of the mind's creation. It has its biases. The biological bias must be first completely understood, and then the opposite bias allowed to find full expression and understanding. Again, the process of acceptance of the body as a balanced, as well as polarized individual may then be accomplished. It is then the task to extend this understanding to the bodies of the other selves whom you will meet. The simplest example of this is the understanding that each biological male is female. Each biological female is male. This is a simple example. However, in almost every case wherein you are attempting the understanding of the body of self or other self, you will again find that the most subtle discernment is necessary in order to fully grasp the polarity complexes involved. So, this gets a little less apparent because the physical manifestations of the body, Ra uses one example, which is, I think, an obvious example. It's about recognizing the polarity of the situation, accepting the other polarized potential, and integrating those two things into an understanding that we're all complete and we're all whole. So like a male biological entity isn't just a male biological entity that we can judge as a male. They also have all of the female aspects within them at some level. If you're male, you have the femaleness within you. If you're female, you have the maleness within you. So these are things that need to be accepted, recognized, but the important thing is that the body comes after the mind. The mind takes a lot of work. This isn't something you jump into all at once. The more you recognize the polarities in the mind of emotional states that affect the mind, then you can start recognizing the polarities of the body and the emotional states and how they affect the body. There are subtle differences between how anger affects the mind and how anger affects the body. And then there are also just the differences between like health and ill health. Those would be physical aspects of the body that aren't necessarily, that originally come from the mind, obviously. Everything comes from the mind. Then what you don't deal with in the mind is what filters down into the body. So if you have ill health, you can work on that as just a bodily distortion as well, and understanding that polarity of healthy and not healthy. One that I've thought about a lot recently, as far as like a bodily complex distortion, is being overstimulated. I have a 4-year-old that I take care of, spend time taking care of every day. I'm a stay-at-home mother with my 4-year-old. And stay-at-home parent, I guess, since we're talking about not having gender biases in this acute moment here. But sometimes he's being loud, he's crashing toys together, he's shrieking, he's screaming, and my mind complex isn't angry, it isn't rejecting what's happening. My body complex just gets totally overstimulated, though, by all of the sensory input that is happening. So there's the polarity of being overstimulated and then being not overstimulated or even being understimulated. So that's one that I've been working with personally, that I've recognized is more of a bodily complex distortion than a mind complex distortion. Because even if I'm in my mind accepting what's happening, that doesn't then totally block out what is happening in my body because of those sensory inputs. So as far as the body goes, I don't have a ton of answers for this one. It's something that I'm still working on. I'm still working on the body, and I think doing the balancing exercises is something that is a tool that we should carry with us and consider that we're going to be carrying with us through most of our incarnation. We're always going to be thrown off our center. We're always going to see and witness the polarized version of events. Again, Ra gives the male-female example, because every day we're interacting with males and females. And we might judge a male through the lens of them being a male, and we might judge a female through the lens of them being a female. And so learning how to not do that. Again, we might judge someone through the lens of being ill, and we might judge someone through the lens of being healthy. And we then project certain things upon people for their physical manifestation of self. And so recognizing when we're doing that and learning to balance it and learning to understand that all beings are complete, despite their current polarized manifestation, they're still complete within, and they have access to all potential manifestations, polarized or not, and that all is possible when we're witnessing the infinite creator. So, Ra says, at this time, we would suggest closing the description until the next time of work so that we may devote time to the third area commensurate with its importance. We can answer a query if it is a short one before we leave this instrument. And so they're talking about then the spirit, doing balancing exercises for the spirit. That's what's in session 6. So for the final question, Dawn asks, is the instrument comfortable? Is there any other thing that would increase the instrument's comfort? That's all. And Ra says, I am Ra. The candle could be rotated clockwise approximately 10 degrees each session to improve the flow of spiraled energy through the being's receiving mechanisms. This particular configuration is well otherwise, but we ask that the objects described and used be centered with geometric care and checked from time to time. Also, that they not be exposed to that space-time in which work is not of importance. I am Ra. I leave this instrument in the love and light of the one infinite creator. Go forth rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one creator, Adonai. So really, they're just reminding them to be very mindful of these objects that they're using on Carla's altar. One thing that they can do is to turn the candle 10 degrees every session. And again, these really are tools for Ra to point out distortions in the channeling that may be affecting Carla, because Carla bears the brunt of the narrow band being widened by Dawn asking transient questions. So the accoutrements are Carla, essentially. They are a physical representation of how she is going to handle and respond to the session, or has handled and responded to the session that has just happened. So just a reminder to be mindful of these objects, to make sure that they are placed in as perfect of an order as possible so that they all work in a harmonious way with Carla's conscious and subconscious mind for when she's doing these sessions. That's really it for this session. I know the balancing exercises are a little tricky. It's really something that you have to do on your own. It's really something that's best just practiced, and the more you surrender to doing the process, the more you will receive guidance on how to fulfill these requirements of these exercises. I do think it's something that sadly I wish Dawn would have asked more about, practiced them, had some more follow-up questions, because Ra is very vague here at the beginning in describing these things, because by giving instructions on how to heal the self and how to heal other selves, they are, again, borderline infringing upon free will unless people completely accept the honor duty of performing healing. So they really start at the surface a lot of the times and talk in a bit of coded language. And if Dawn would have practiced more and then asked follow-up questions that were more specific, then Ra could have addressed those specific questions. But ultimately, we all have guides who are with us, and if we learn to hear and accept our inner guidance and follow that inner guidance, we will be more and more guided on how to perform these metaphysical tasks. So I just encourage everyone to really surrender to understanding themselves and that process and the length of time that it takes to go through that process, and being just really very gentle and compassionate with yourself, and accepting that we're all human and we're all very flawed and just emotional little creatures who are very wound up very tight, but we can work with that. We can find ways to unravel those feelings and emotions and all of the things that keep us distracted and distorted from the pure light of the infinite that is available for us to access. So, thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, I would be happy to hear them and I will try to answer them. But again, this is kind of tricky stuff to talk about. I would suggest just jumping in and trying to do it and fulfilling the honor duty of having received the knowledge of these exercises. So, thank you all again. Have a wonderful day.